never imagined that the children I sacrificed everything for would one day lock me away like an unwanted piece of furniture. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 58 years old, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. For more than 30 years, I worked as a nurse, raised 2 children as a single mother, and spent every spare dollar making sure they had opportunities one never had. I thought that was what family meant, giving without keeping score. I was wrong. 3 years ago, my husband passed away after a long battle with cancer. Losing him shattered me. The house we had built together suddenly felt too quiet. Every room carried memories of a life that no longer existed. Still, I stayed strong. I kept myself busy with gardening, church activities, and weekly dinners with my son Daniel and daughter Rebecca. At least, that's what I believed was happening. Slowly, things began to change. Daniel started asking questions about my finances. At first, it seemed harmless. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing? Mom, that house is a lot for one person. Mom, what happens if something happens to you?" I thought he was concerned about me. Rebecca agreed with everything he said. Looking back now, I realized they weren't worried about me. They were worried about the house. The house sat on a beautiful corner lot in a growing neighborhood. Property values had risen dramatically over the years. What had once been an ordinary family home had become a valuable piece of real estate. But to me, it wasn't property. It was my life. Every wall held a memory. Every creaking floorboard carried a story. Then one evening, Daniel and Rebecca arrived together. Their unusually serious expressions made my stomach tighten. "Mom," Daniel said carefully, "we've been talking." That sentence alone made me nervous. Rebecca reached across the kitchen table and squeezed my hand. "We think you need more support." I laughed. "I mow my own lawn, drive myself to church, and volunteer twice a week." Neither of them laughed back. Daniel slid a brochure across the table. "A nursing home." I stared at it. For a moment, I thought it was a joke. Then I realized they were completely serious. The room suddenly felt colder. "You think I belong in a nursing home?" I asked. "It's not like that," Rebecca replied quickly. "It sounds exactly like that." They exchanged a glance that told me this conversation had been planned long before they arrived. What they said next would change everything I thought I knew about my family. And before the month was over, I would discover a secret plan that had been unfolding behind my back for far longer than I could have imagined. The moment Daniel and Rebecca left that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table for nearly an hour. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation. A nursing home. The words felt absurd. I was healthy. I managed my own finances. I drove myself everywhere. I wasn't confused, disabled, or unable to care for Miss So. Why were they pushing this so hard? Over the next few weeks, their behavior became impossible to ignore. Daniel started dropping by unexpectedly. Rebecca called several times a day, asking the same questions. "Did you take your medication? Are you feeling okay? Did you remember your appointment?" At first, it sounded caring. Then it started feeling like an investigation. One afternoon, I overheard part of a conversation that made my blood run cold. Daniel had come over while I was gardening in the backyard. He thought I was still outside when he stepped into the house and answered his phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. "She's getting stubborn," he said. A pause. "No, not yet. We need the paperwork first." "Paperwork?" My heart started pounding. I moved closer to the open kitchen window. "Once she's settled into the facility, selling the property will be much easier." The property. At that moment, something inside me broke. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about concern. It was about my house. That evening, I couldn't sleep. Questions raced through my mind. What paperwork?
Who was he talking to?
How long had this been planned? The answers came sooner than I expected. A week later, Rebecca arrived carrying several documents. She placed them on my dining room table. "We just need your signature on a few things." I looked down. Power of attorney. Medical authorization forms. Property-related documents. My stomach dropped. Why would I sign these? Rebecca's smile disappeared. "It's just precautionary."
No.
She looked surprised.
No.
I said no. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine frustration flash across her face. That reaction told me everything.
They weren't asking.
They were expecting compliance. When I refused, the pressure intensified. Daniel began questioning my memory. Rebecca started suggesting I seemed forgetful. Small mistakes that everyone makes suddenly became evidence that I couldn't manage my own affairs. One afternoon, I found out something even worse. A neighbor named Susan stopped me while I was collecting my mail. "Margaret," she said cautiously, "I hope you don't mind me asking, are you moving?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She looked confused. "Your son told several people that you'll be relocating to assisted living soon." I felt the ground shift beneath me. They weren't just discussing it. They were telling people it was already happening. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at family photographs. The faces smiling back at me belonged to children I barely recognized anymore. Then I made a decision. If Daniel and Rebecca were hiding something, I was going to find out exactly what it was. The next morning, I started digging through records, emails, and public documents. What I discovered 3 days later left me shaking with anger. My children had already been speaking with a real estate agent, and they weren't planning for a future sale. They were preparing to sell my house immediately after removing me from it. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't dealing with misguided children. I was dealing with betrayal, and they had no idea their plan was about to fall apart. When I discovered that Daniel and Rebecca had already been discussing the sale of my house with a real estate agent, I felt sick. But anger quickly replaced the hurt. For weeks, they had treated me like I was incapable of making my own decisions. Meanwhile, they had been making plans for my future without my permission. I knew I needed proof. Fortunately, years of nursing had taught me something important. Never act before you have facts. I contacted an attorney in Columbus and explained everything. The more documents he reviewed, the more concerned he became. "They've crossed several lines," he told me. That meeting changed everything. Over the following weeks, my attorney helped me secure my finances, update legal documents, and ensure that nobody could make decisions on my behalf without my explicit consent. Then he uncovered something even more shocking. Daniel had already spoken with mortgage and title professionals about transferring ownership after my move. They had been acting as though my departure from the house was guaranteed. The betrayal hurt more than I can describe. Not because of the money, because these were my children. The people I had loved unconditionally. The people I thought would protect me. Instead, they were trying to profit from me. A month later, Daniel and Rebecca invited themselves over. They looked unusually confident. I suspected they believed I had finally given up. We sat in the living room where so many family memories had been made. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we've found a wonderful nursing facility." Rebecca smiled. "You'll be much happier there." I looked at both of them calmly. Then I placed a folder on the coffee table. "Before we discuss my future," I said, "let's discuss yours." Their smiles disappeared. Inside the folder were copies of the documents, emails, and records my attorney had gathered. The room became silent. Rebecca's face turned pale. Daniel couldn't even look at me. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "I spent my entire life trusting you." Neither of them answered. "You didn't want to help me." Still silence. "You wanted my house." Rebecca began crying. Daniel stared at the floor. For the first time, they had no excuses.
No explanations.
No way to twist the truth. Then I revealed the final surprise. Months earlier, after my husband's death, I had quietly created a trust. The house was no longer something they could simply inherit and sell. Its future would be determined according to my wishes, not theirs. The look on their faces told me everything. Their entire plan had collapsed. Over the following year, our relationship changed dramatically. Trust doesn't return overnight. Sometimes it never fully returns at all. I remained in my home. I continued gardening, volunteering, and living independently. The place they had tried to take from me became a symbol of something much bigger. My freedom, my dignity, my right to decide my own future. Today, when I sit on my front porch and watch the Ohio sunset, I think about that painful chapter of my life. I wish my children had chosen differently. But I don't regret standing up for myself. Because growing older does not mean surrendering your voice. And sometimes the most important lesson a parent can teach is that respect is not an inheritance. It must be earned.